Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jean-Pascal Chauvet. I'm a strategic consultant at Ab Initio, and I'm going to be introducing this next session. I'm really excited about this session because it's about data culture and data acumen. And so it's really about instantly assessing the needed skills using data acumen and a quick reference. So in the session, we have Lorraine Fellows, Dr. Ali Obaidi, and Mike Fleckenstein. And so I'm just going to hand it over to you guys to go to this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, JP. Welcome, everybody. We're excited to be here. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So we are from the MITRE Corporation. MITRE Corporation, as many of you probably know, is an FFRDC, federally funded research and development center. We essentially act as a research arm for the US government. And what we see on a routine basis is that folks struggle with data. We are all part of a practice at MITRE. That's essentially data management. And we work with strategically as well as hands-on with executives, managers, staff across the federal government to help them solve data problems. One of the things we have noticed over the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years, maybe even as long as we've been there, is that folks often don't know where to get started. And so it is with data literacy, or data acumen, as we like to call it. And one of the definitions around data literacy and data acumen are fuzzy. And even once people understand what the definitions are, they really don't know where to look to see what skills somebody might need in order to come up to speed. So we had a little bit of money set aside a year or two ago, and we decided to put together a quick reference. And the idea behind that quick reference is we list some roles and we list some levels in the organization, and we summarized what we thought the most important skills were at a particular level for a particular role, so that folks could look quickly to see what needed skills and perhaps what pathways there are towards becoming literate in a particular area. So with that, let's jump in. We begin with what is data culture. And it's fuzzy, like we said. It's the collective belief of people that value data, and that's important. This is a Tableau definition. Forbes defines it a little bit more. And what I like about this definition is that they include executives, right? So often in all areas of data management, we see executives that are very busy asking staff to get started on something, and they don't really have time to engage. But in the case of data culture, as we'll see, it's really important for executives not just to engage, but to take the lead. Forbes also focuses on data champions, right? And those exist even informally in organizations that don't have very well defined data management, data governance, or now with the AI, the coming of AI, governance around that. And then your sort of key terms, trusted, accessible, shared, right? Which is what everyone is trying to do now. And interestingly, they put data literacy as a key point for working data culture. IDC, similar type of breakout. They break it out into people at the center, the attitudes, making sure that data is along the lines of value for your organization. Goals such as transparency and making sure that people understand how they need to use data. So the business case for the use of data, and then creating social forums to collaborate and exchange information. So then what is data literacy or data acumen? It's very, very closely tied to data culture, the ability to make good judgments about the use of data. And that isn't just at the operational level, that's also, as we can see here, towards improving society, for example, or the greater values of why we want to use data in a particular context. Gartner emphasizes context also, a little bit more technical here, the ability to read, write, and communicate data, but in context. And then lastly, Peter Aiken, who is also here. I think he's probably speaking on Thursday. In his book, actually takes a broader view and says, hey, it isn't just data professionals that need to be data literate. It's also individuals. It is everyone. However, today, the quick reference focuses on the data acumen for data professionals. Recent CDO survey shows that cultural factors are still the #1 roadblock for organizations to become data literate. And then in 2019, MITRE hosted at the time the Army's CDO, along with several industry executives in data, and just to foster a dialogue in terms of what is important in terms of data culture and data literacy for each. And while there were some differences, here's what the conclusion was. As we saw in the survey, here too, culture change was the #1 factor. So the ability to work across lines of business, in fact, with the executives being the leaders, 60% of the weight, in fact, falling on the leaders to be evangelists for data. Another important factor here was explicitly data literacy, and some of the ways they described that was understanding security and privacy, the importance of talking to people about the benefits, and we see this with CDOs that we talk to all the time, that they spend very little time in their office and more time working closely with their peers and business in order to help folks understand how data might be used effectively. And then lack of resources. And what was interesting here is that in industry, the couple of companies had teams that were quite big, right? So in the case of Morgan Chase, for example, there was a team of 200 under the CDO, or in the case of Johnson & Johnson, a team of 60. Now we, in the government where we primarily work, don't always see big teams like that, but it is telling that effective data management organizations where people are more data literate have larger teams. So that's a little bit of context around how we see data culture and data literacy, and the basis that we used to develop the data acumen quick reference. With that, I'll hand it over to Lorraine and Ali to take a little bit of a closer look at the actual quick reference. Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Next slide, yes. So as Mike mentioned, our focus really was concentrating on data literacy and for data professionals interested really what they can do to help move forward our data profession, our citizenry, and the society. The quick reference really aim to highlight some of the key data skills for selected jobs or job functions at all levels of the organization, whether it's in an enterprise or at the line of business, and within the context of the data lifecycle, from creation, storing, sharing, archiving, retirement. The quick reference is really not, we haven't designed it to be prescriptive, rather to express the importance of data acumen and data literacy. Also, the quick reference really aimed at aligning with and extending the what Open Data Institute data literacy framework have done, and to cover the at all organizational staff levels, whether they are staff, managers, executives, across all functions. It really aimed to assess what data literacy skills might be beneficial to address the business need. The quick reference, it looks and assess and leverage the current skills and highlights areas of expertise and how people could really be organized around these areas. The quick reference also be used to determine if there are any gaps, such as highlighting missing data, acumen functions, or looking at expert needed at different staff level, or their organization, how their organization could align the different skills. Finally, I would say that the quick reference can be used to evaluate what needed data acumen training does and does not cover, to leverage the internal or the external training for missing data acumen. So what we see here on this slide is a high level depiction of the quick reference. It's really first highlight the key acumen for common organizational need. And as we said, reference is not meant to be perspective. It covers all data, roles below and more. It's really looks at each role involved in the data skills. For example, how we would find data, or data related knowledge of the organization, how to be able to leverage data to get things done, addressed through the organization specific training. The makeup of a given data team really depends on the use case. Does not usually include every role or every level. We highlighted two examples here. One is the analytical team, might include data scientists, data analysts, metrics support, for the data from the data stewards to and data architectures and stakeholders. A chief data officer, maybe CDO, narrowly focus on data governance, and quality might include data governance operations, or data analyst with metrics participation from data stewards and architect. So what we highlighting here is really on the left hand side we provided the different job functions. On the top, we classified those job function within a staff, manager, and executive, and under each we provided the skills needed to perform that role or that job function. And as well as we provided some job titles in that quick reference. On the all jobs, it's basically covers what people or everyone should know. It covers areas of basic security, record management, organization policies, critical thinking, ethics, interpretation, and basically understanding how to answer questions and escalate data issues. So if you look at from the staff point of view, that's what they do. I want to answer a question. I want to escalate data. I want to be able to know what's there. At the managers and probably the staff level, we'll probably want to understand how the data is used to make decisions. While in the and that could be really taught through an organization data 101 course, and Lorraine will explain that in more detail later. The data science here, it covers areas such as how to wrangle big data, how to understand when it comes to the staff on the manager's level, could be to understand tools and environments, while at the executive level could be a CEO or a CDAO who wants to promote for an effectively integrated and analytical program. If we look at the data analysis, with the job title of data analyst, basically at the staff level, you could translate business problems into underlying data. Or you provide data calls for managers or champion the use of data to solve business problems for executives. At the data steward positions, basically translating business problems into underlying data. That's for the staff. For the managers, considered as the business data steward, was basically cultivating deep domain knowledge about data, while at the executive level could be a CDO or a data governance body member who be able to champion data management and secure funding for the program. Data governance operation position for a staff is a junior analyst that could probably facilitate the data initiatives, or for a manager could be a data governance SME or director who could create data strategy roadmap. We thought that at the executive level, it will be a CDO that understand the major technology and the data gaps. At the data architecture level, we think about the staff and management at the same level, basically apply how to define the data lifecycle and understand the data platform. and at the we think also at the data architecture could be a CDO or CIO or CISO that really understand the major technology and data gaps within the architecture. Knowledge management here could be a librarian, a knowledge worker, or analyst. It apply skills like taxonomies, unstructured data management at that level. For the business unit, it understanding the knowledge management platform and discovery, while at the executive level could be how to be able to have knowledge management resource location. And sometimes you probably also work at the policies or the strategies, application of those policies and strategies, although sometimes that could be at the business unit manager. Record management, it's at the staff, each staff should experience how the data life cycle of a structure and unstructured data, what a record is. At the manager level could be an ARO, agency record officer, that provide an application for policies and strategies, while at the senior or the executive level could be a senior admin officer, or for record management that be able to provide the resource allocation. Finally, on the data engineering positions, we think that mainly data engineering is about developing, maintaining data pipelines. Staff and managers should be able to provide that capability. However, for the executive, could be a CTO or CIO that will be able to understand the IT infrastructure and have a deep knowledge about it and its associated strategy. Back to you, Lorraine. Yeah. Lorraine. You are on mute, Mike.
Yeah, so I'll jump back online till Lorraine is able to rejoin. This really just encapsulates what Ali was just saying. Are you back, Lorraine? Lorraine, feel free to jump in whenever. Okay. So here we just summarize sort of the different functional areas that we saw down the left-hand side of the quick reference. And it's important to emphasize that we didn't include all functions. We included key functions that we thought were important, that are very common. And we added some functions in there that maybe everyone doesn't think of. So for example, data governance operations. I'm sure you've all seen sort of the data governance pyramid with different levels of responsibility, starting with staff and operational staff, and then managers and executives sort of at the top. But in order, we have found for data governance to really work, there's a small team which we call data governance operations, which sort of facilitates data governance up and down that pyramid. And so we felt that particular role was important enough to list. Or another example might be records management. that, records management is something that's been around, at least in the federal government, for much longer than data management. And there's even a federal agency, the National Archives, that has preserved records. Historically, these have been paper records, but I think coming up next year, I think the NARA has actually deferred the deadline once. They won't accept paper anymore, and so now it's digital content, and you can see the overlap between records management and data management. Is significant at this point, and it's, I think, ideal for records managers and data managers to work together. So these are examples of those roles that we felt are important, but it's important also to know that there are, of course, other roles. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide here.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, this is going to be interesting. My Zoom has crashed twice. We'll try. So I'm going to walk through a few example roles from the quick reference guide. Often I've seen data acumen or data literacy conversations start with data scientists, and that's fine. But
hey, Lorraine, you're breaking up a little bit. Maybe turn your video off. That might help.
Okay. Does that improve? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's still a little choppy, but let's give it a shot.
All right, we'll give it a shot. So often I've seen data acumen discussions start with data scientists, but as Ali mentioned, there are a lot of other roles. And often those are, in fact, supporting the data scientists. Data analysis is one of them. So data analysts can be a cost-effective way to support your data scientists' efforts of wrangling data, preparing data, and is also a key role to support the data stewards. Some examples of key skills would be things like profiling, having an experience with profiling tools and root cause analysis. You would want your data analyst to at least have a basic understanding of data modeling and data architecture. Those are very useful when they're doing things like DQ analysis, root cause analysis. And of course, you want them to understand the tools being used by your specific organization. As our keynote speaker this morning mentioned, AI is beginning to creep into these areas and the tools are beginning to change. On the manager side, you would want the manager to have a broad understanding of business problems across the various business domains for the organization. You would also want them to have experience with fielding and responding to data calls. That's particularly important with less mature organizations that are still building out their architecture and their data management infrastructure. You'd also want the manager to have a basic understanding of industry frameworks and maturity models. At the executive level, you would want them to have at least an awareness of those industry frameworks and maturity models, but more importantly, you would want them to be able to align the data work being done and prioritize the data work being done to ensure that you're actually solving business problems. There's lots of good work you can do, but if you're not solving business problems, then you're not really helping the organization. You would want to make sure that the data work aligns with the organization's vision and strategy and roadmap. The data steward role is another very important role. At the staff level, you're often looking at data analysts. The stewards themselves are typically mid-level managers. Some of the things that you would want in a data steward would be experience, in-depth experience across the business domain. That's something that you may or may not be able to hire. You would also want your steward to have an understanding of the upstream and downstream for their domain. For instance, they need to understand the users, both from business function perspective and from a system perspective. That's an example of institutional knowledge that you can't typically hire for, right? That's something that needs to be cultivated, documented, and passed on. You would also want them to understand the acquisition process and system selection process from a data management perspective. You want to be involved, for instance, as you're monitoring systems. And you would want them to be able to define metrics and measure and use those metrics for their domain. At the executive level, you're typically talking about the chief data officer and data governance body members. And at that level, one of those important things you want to have the ability to champion the data management program and the organization's policies. Again, that's to some degree institutional knowledge, but you want these people to be, I hate to say salesmen, but you want them to communicate the importance of the data management program and be able to speak to policies. You also want to make sure they have at least a basic understanding of the data drivers, whether those are legislative, regulatory, or policy related. And you would want them to understand the organization's data risks. And those risks could be key person dependencies. It could be risks related to AI. It could be risks related to authoritative sources and their technical issues, right? So those risks are a broad swath. Next slide. A couple of other useful functions. So data governance operations is critical to the success of data governance, but it's too often unfunded, unformalized. It typically includes both junior level and more senior management director level. At the junior level, you would want your people to have an understanding of the organization's data governance, knowledge management, record management, frameworks, and policies. That's, again, institutional knowledge that you're not going to find externally. You need to cultivate that. You would want them to have things like soft skills, communication skills, and common sense understanding of what to escalate when. At the director level, you would want someone who has a broad understanding of data management and data governance, preferably somebody who has experience doing data strategies and roadmaps, because those are often done through governance, or at least socialized through governance. You would also want to make sure that your director level has an understanding of the legal, privacy, security drivers, and an understanding of the organization's business reference model, if you have one, data inventories, data taxonomies. At the executive level, you're again talking about the CDO and the executive governance body members, as discussed under stewardship. Records management is also important. Increasingly, records are electronic. They overlap with the data in systems.
Hey, sorry, Lorraine. Let me interject here because the audio is all garbled and it's really difficult to it's really difficult to understand. So may I suggest either to call in on the phone if you are able to do this to continue, or if someone else, Mike or
Mike, why don't you take over?
Yep, I'm going to jump in, and maybe Lorraine, you can switch to the phone.
Yep.
Okay, let's proceed. Yeah, so like we mentioned, these are two very important positions, records management, since records are becoming more and more digital. Although I think we are often surprised by how much paper there still exists, at least in the federal government. I'm sure that's true on the private sector side too. Just one little example is that the IRS still has a mandate to accept paper because maybe not everyone has access to electronic means. But in any case, it's an important enough position in terms of acumen that we felt it belonged in the data management space. And we listed it here. So at the staff level, things like retention policies, right? Understanding of what the retention policies are. And those are, these are becoming issues on the data management side too, right? As we move things to the cloud, how long do we want to keep things? What's relevant? What's not relevant anymore? The last thing we want to do is feed our large language models with information that's out of date. At the manager level, it's important to understand when there are acquisitions, how does that play into records management? Do these tools have the ability to accommodate records management? And there are related things. And I think these don't only happen at the federal government, they happen in private industry too, e-discovery and FOIA. Now, FOIA, probably not explicitly in industry, but the ability to find information is hugely important across the board. And then at the executive level, it's really important to understand the program, and lots of these things merge together, right? So knowledge management, privacy, e-discovery, and of course that all plays into risk management. At the executive level, it's really important to protect your reputation and to make sure you're compliant in terms of presenting current data. So it's an important role. So with that, one other thing, if you, in this presentation, if you click on the upper right hand here, you can get to the full document. I won't do that here and now, but it's about 4 pages, 11 by 17. We tried to make it as small as we could, but ultimately that's about as small as we could get it. All right, so continuing then, AI governance is all over the news. Well, AI is all over the news, and maybe AI governance not so much, but there is a lot of activity around AI governance. And we see this very much as an extension of data governance or data management, and are giving some thought around how to integrate the AI governance component into the data acumen quick reference. So let's talk about a little bit how we're going about that. Here is the Dembach wheel about data management, and you can see all these topics that are hugely familiar to everyone. And these skills are mostly focused on how people manage various aspects of data, things like very, very sort of tactical, right? Security or metadata, management, which is becoming much more important in terms of unstructured data and tagging, data architecture, and so on. But what's happening is with the coming of AI, there are questions around things like algorithmic accountability, or human values, or social norms, or policy compliance. And these are topics that are, while one could argue relevant to data management or data governance, they're less talked about in that realm and much more talked about in terms of AI governance. So, another type of framework typically looks somewhat like this, right? Where now we look at things like how auditable is a machine-generated data set, the algorithm behind it. How ethical is the application? in terms of how the data is being used. Does it promote human values? How are people in the loop? Are we letting machines make decisions like who we're going to hire, or is there a person in the loop? And ultimately, what's the risk in applying artificial intelligence with whatever level of human involvement? So these are questions that AI governance is very concerned with. Many of you probably seen this, the Berkman Klein Center study that they did on principles in AI governance. So they looked across government and private sector and sort of cross organizations like the G20 or IEEE or OECD, and they said, okay, how common are there sets of principles across the board? And the focus was on human values, but in general, what they found is that there's a very high degree of commonality in terms of AI principles or AI governance principles, right? You can see on the left, there are the different areas that the study looked at, and those are represented with the smallest circle starting with privacy in the largest circle, then promotion of human values. And the size of the dot represents the emphasis in each case. And if there's a star or a diamond, it's just explicitly around human values. So there are a lot of principles that have been put out there, and many more since this study was done. However, operationalizing those principles is still a challenge, right? We haven't seen a lot of that. Then another thing that we wanted to take into consideration is, we talk about AI governance, but how does it relate to these other terms like responsible AI or AI assurance? And we looked at some definitions. Here's one for AI governance from NIST that focuses on stakeholder values and the importance of policies in deploying AI. I think we can look to places like the EU and maybe to Canada on the federal side. United Kingdom has something out there. Singapore was early on, all talking about the approach to how AI is deployed. AI assurance, we use our own definition here, typically more tactical in terms of focusing on output, that the output should be correct based on the right evidence and be helpful. Maybe a little more tactical, trustworthy AI, taking those same terms, maybe going, a little wider again, more strategic, but again, looking at things like reliability, explainability, fairness, accountability. And then lastly, responsible AI, again, emphasizing the human values in terms of AI application as the definition for AI governance. So we see there is tremendous overlap. We find that these definitions are still fuzzy and evolving, and the terms are used somewhat interchangeably, although people, in any given context may have a specific idea of that perhaps assurance is more tactical and responsible AI is more strategic. So then how might we take all of that information and overlay that into the acumen quick reference? Here's where we are with our thinking. We have on the top more traditional concepts, data management concepts, and at the bottom more AI governance concepts. And then the arrow from left to right representing where those concepts are applied. On the left, perhaps more traditional application of the concepts. In the middle, sort of very overlapping applications of the concepts. And then on the right, really those terms or those skills or the literacy around terms that are more relevant to AI governance, right? And you're all familiar with most of these, but things like authoritative data sources, data standards, records management, very traditional. And then you see the large list of things that apply to both. Now they are split here between maybe what's more traditional and what's more AI governance oriented. And we have the term accountability, and want to make sure that you understand that we are talking about algorithmic accountability here, not accountability, human accountability, which is of course a term that applies broadly, but things like ethical and legal consideration and risk management, while they apply in traditional data management and data governance, there's a much higher emphasis in terms of AI governance. So looking on the right, then, these are the kinds of skills that we are thinking of integrating into our quick reference, but we're not there yet. We'll evolve the reference here over the coming weeks and months, and we are certainly open to input from others. So let's now turn a little bit towards learning paths, and what we mean here is,
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
I'm going to try presenting from Ali's office since his side of the building seems to have better internet.
Wonderful. Okay, awesome. So we've gone over sort of the functions and the different levels at the organization and what skills are needed sort of in each cell, but how do you get there? So over to you guys, Ali and Lorraine.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So one of the first learning paths that we think you need to address is the all-employee, right? We think there is a real need for organization-specific data 101 training. Why is that needed? Well, it's a frequent refrain that knowledge workers, including data scientists, but also others, people who are doing reports, pretty much any knowledge worker, are spending an inordinate amount of time trying to find data and understand the data that they need to do their jobs. And also, in too many cases, finding that data and understanding it seems to be dependent on who you know, and it really shouldn't be. So one of the fundamental objectives of a data acumen program, we think, needs to be providing employees in general with an understanding of the organization's data environment and data resources. They also need to understand, be able to figure out at a high level the purpose and meaning of the data that they're using and what's expected of them when they're using it, distributing it, protecting it. One of the best ways I know of to do this is through an introductory course that you could give to all employees. We're going to talk through a little bit examples of what that course might include. So things like an understanding of the organization's business at a high level, right? You can't separate the business from the data. So if you have a business reference model that explains the services and capabilities and functions of the organization, that's something you would want to cover. Similar for the data. You need a high-level data taxonomy, sometimes called a data reference model or a data hierarchy, essentially subject areas and data categories, and who's responsible for them. If you have a logical data model, you would want to introduce staff that, hey, this exists and this is where you find it. You would want to be able to tie the organization, the business functions, and the data, right? So that whatever your question is, you can navigate that across those. Assuming you have governance, you need to explain the governance framework to new employees. Too often I've seen organizations that think they have governance, but the staff doesn't know it exists, doesn't know who represents them, or doesn't know how to contact them. So those are all important things that you would want to cover. You want to make sure that they can figure out who represents their organization on a given data management body, or who the data steward is for the data that they need. And if they need to escalate something, how they contact the data governance operations group. Next slide. Assuming you have a catalog, you want to review the catalog with them so that they know how to find data. In an ideal world, your catalog would be searchable through the data taxonomy. So you could say, like, I don't have to know the term I'm looking for. I can go through, okay, I need customer data. No, I don't need customer profile. Oh yeah, I need customer financials. And from there, you can see all the systems that have that data. If you have enterprise repositories like a data lake or a data warehouse that you want to be broadly used and reused, you would want to go through those. If you have enterprise dashboards or reusable reports, you would want your new employees to understand those. You also want to make sure they understand the rules for creating, using, and sharing data. So that's probably a link to your policies and any standards or guidelines you have. Also, compliance requirements. If there are particular laws, for instance, that are relevant to your organization, you want to make sure they're aware of them and they know who to call if they have a question. And we also need to start introducing data ethics. That may be examples of your organization's values when it comes to data collection, data processing, and data use. Next slide. So Ali is now going to talk you through a Google case study that'll give you a little more information on a management level learning path.
Great. Thank you. Mike, if we can go to the next slide first, I would like to introduce a sample executive level education opportunities. We thought that could be helpful for the CDOs. The University of Arkansas in Little Rock, they aligned with MIT to create an academic institute called the Institute for Chief Data Officers, those dedicated to the development of chief data officers. They provide 2-day course training. Luckily, we both Mike and I were participant in that 2-day course, and we highly recommend it. Another executive level education opportunities through George Mason University. They have a Chief Data and Analytic Office program. They conducting that in partnership with industry and educational leaders, basically to help advance organizations' data management agenda. Both Mike and I taught and still teach in this program. We teach classes in data strategy, architecture, governance, and data ethics. Finally, Carnegie Mellon, they have introduced a Chief Data Officer program. This is new 6 months cohort, begin in May. It offers current and future CDOs the critical strategic insights on and management techniques, and be able to provide analytical capabilities to set up a management program. Mike, can we go back to so on this slide, I'm not going to really to go over it like in detail. This is when we teach data ethics and responsible AI. we do the teaching through use cases, and here is one of the use cases that we used this year during our module. It basically talks about the CEO of Google, Pichai, who really announced the company shift from mobile first to AI first initiative. They came up with 7 principles that govern the research and business decisions. Those are listed here. And then they came up also with the policies that Google won't pursue harmful technology that cause overall harm. By 2022, they had 30 members and worldwide 200 employee within their training program. They provided voluntary submission of products, features, or funding requests. And they came up with a review process, a 4-step review process from intake to analysis to adjustment, decision, and consultation. We think that this was one very important use cases that we could really leverage to provide educational for education for CDOs at the executive level.
Hey, I'm sorry to interject. A quick time check. We have 4 minutes left, so 3 minutes left actually. So if you guys want to wrap up.
Sure, Mike.
Yeah, so I think we can wrap up. There's just really one other slide. We certainly need to do more work to identify additional learning paths, and we would like to develop an assessment tool that's a little bit more user-friendly. So please reach out if you'd like to be involved, if you feel like this is useful. With that, if there are any questions, if we do have a minute or two, happy to take those.
We do have some very interesting questions, actually. So yeah, maybe like how to use this guide in practice, and how do you use it jointly with the actual tooling, data governance tooling that the organization might have, whether it's a data catalog or something like this. Like in practice, if you can spend like a minute on like in practice, the experience.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just piggyback on what Lorraine said. That the Data 101, Data Literacy 101 course that is developed specifically for the organization includes, for example, the data catalog and an overview, how it's used, where the data can be found, and so on. So I think that hopefully answers that question. JP, if there are other questions, maybe you can get them to us and we can answer them by email and post them somewhere. Is that possible?
Absolutely. The Hoover platform is open throughout the symposium. And so the list of questions is there. I can summarize them and send it to you guys. But to the audience, if you have other questions or if you have more thoughts, as you slip on the points that we are making in this session, do not hesitate to post your questions even tonight or tomorrow on Hoover. At the end of the symposium, we'll collect all of them and then send them to the speakers.
Awesome.
Okay, so I thank you. This was very interesting. I certainly learned a lot myself. Thank you to the audience, and we'll see everyone in the next session, which on track F is in, I think, an hour and a half or something like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Take care.